going to be talking about a dietitian's perspective in working with people to help them with their eating. And I'm going to be kind of drilling down to the kind of things I might be doing in my session. I have a particular context where I work with people. There are not very many public sector settings where I could be employed to work intensively with people in an outpatient setting, so consequently I work in private practice doing this. So my work with people will be framed around exploring the person's eating behaviour, and in my assessment, of course, I'll be looking at all the medical and physical and psychiatric risks that might be going on for the person, but what I'll be wanting to explore with the person over time will be getting an overall picture of their understanding of their approach to their own eating behaviour, and particularly in eating disorders, I feel that this is the area that we really want to that dominates for the person and that we're wanting to get a very complete picture of. Okay, now this is another image that I've just been thinking about over the last few days in trying to develop this talk about what is an approach to nutritional and eating behaviour treatment in eating disorders. This comes from some ideas I found on the website called Healthy Place, where there's an interview with a dietitian who talked about these three elements of eating behaviour, or what a dietitian might do around support, around education and experimentation. And of course these work in a very interactive way, so I don't do one first before the other, it depends on what I'm working with a client. And I usually work with both the individual and their family and carers in various contexts. In practice, I would probably rarely see somebody under about 16 or so without their parents, and most likely in those occasions there's a fair degree of working out who my client is. So it may, as the person is younger, the client is more likely to be the parents. There might be a more shared process in that with the older person, but I do see people well up into their 50s, so I might be more working with an individual there. Now, the supportive elements of this I think are extremely important. That I think eating behaviour is an extremely complex behaviour of which we know very little. It's surprising, it's sort of a bit like as plain as the nose on your face, that we don't think much about our sense of smell, we don't think much about eating behaviour. Thankfully in human beings it seems like a wide variety of behaviours end up with relatively healthy human beings who can reproduce the next generation, but we still don't know very much about it. And what goes wrong in eating behaviour we don't understand very well, so we are still working in the dark a lot. I think that's extremely important to be able to get over to our clients, that this is very complex behaviour, that it's not easy to change in the short term, and that it's actual gradual change that they might be looking for. People often, in their personal meaning, the biggest thing that they'll read into this is that it's always about deficit, that there's something wrong with me, that I'm very weird, this is telling me something very strong about my personality, and probably the briefest term I can use is that people feel very stupid in having something going on with their eating behaviour. And I think that needs to be called out continually, because there is absolutely no evidence to say that stupid people have eating disorders. Surprisingly enough, if you do a kind of like nutritional test, what's the best source of this micronutrient, of course people come up with deficits in their knowledge. What do we expect from teenagers? And that's the job of a dietitian. That's a professional position to know about that sort of material. And if I sat down to a test tomorrow, I might need to do a bit of study on that too. But in fact, if I actually get people to run through, how would you look after someone who was not dissimilar to you? Tell me what you would do to look after their meals for a day. Surprisingly enough, people do seem to have quite reasonable knowledge of, at least theoretical, practical knowledge of what to do on a day-by-day basis. The difficulty they have is that they're excluded from that care. They don't feel that that's available to them. They find it very difficult to offer that to themselves. But being able to make that leap, that there is some basic good knowledge there. The other thing that people need to be able to reflect on is whether their family's been able to hand them good knowledge. The food ways of their families probably are more beneficial than problematic. That's also something that you need strongly to get over to families, that they've been able to raise their child till now And a lot of I haven't talked about my references or anything like that, but that's drawn from all the material that we've talked about today already. Okay, the kind of educational material that I find useful to come back to again and again and again is to talk about the effect of starvation on people's psychological function and their digestive function. That's something that we're always going on about, and people misinterpret it in many unhelpful ways. That I will constantly reflect with people about how weight actually works on a day-by-day basis. People need a lot of help with interpreting that and getting perhaps a much longer-term understanding how weight trends work and what might be the underlying causes of those kind of trends. So I'll use a lot of weight charts and getting people to monitor and look at trends over time. Let me just remind myself of what are the points I wanted to make about that. Of course, it's extremely important for people to question how they like to categorise food. That we know that people with eating disorders seem to prefer to use very black and white ways of thinking about food or get stuck in that kind of anxious mode. So drawing out more helpful ways, so I often use Rick Horsman's ideas of everyday and sometimes food, which still gives people that kind of binary choice, but at least it's a bit more low-key than allowed and not allowed. So that helps people then reflect on what does everyday mean to me, what does sometimes mean to me. Because, you know, sometimes the chocolate might be every day, really, I think. Just not all day. Okay, but often people really underestimate how much food is actually required just for survival, and how much food is required for weight restoration. Parents often, because they've been kind of so cowed by the eating disorder, that they're often quite tentative in their attempts to help their child eat more, and they need their confidence built that in fact they've always served good meals, and that both adolescents and a weight restoring adolescent need bucket loads of food. So it's always useful to give people a lot of help in that area. I think that there's a lot of work that people need to do in exploring appetite and appetite regulation, and a big part of a dietitian's work will be in helping young people with the lost art of housekeeping, especially around food. So just things like, how do you do meal planning, recipes, how do you organise yourself to shop and things like that. Now, my approaches to this, I guess my training in this first came in picking up ideas from CBT that seemed to really suit me, and so I use a lot of behaviour experimentations with the permission of the clients. This is a collaborative process, and the idea of that is to look to where they would like to go, see what the barrier is, and seeing what our attempts to reduce their anxiety around food is, so that they can get a much more realistic understanding of how dangerous small amounts of change might be, but also to recognise their courage in these attempts, because this is really difficult work that people are doing. I'm always trying to encourage people to see these are small steps, that we try something new, that usually there are unexpected things that come out of that people find that they like certain foods more than they did, or they don't care about certain foods more than they did, that they understand much more about their own feelings of guilt, their own reactions to things, and the reactions of other people just by doing that kind of practice. So much more comes out of it than just putting, I don't know, bread back in your diet. And to try again, to get people to take that more experimental approach where they're not committing to a kind of a symbolic change, you know, like a religious conversion by eating breakfast tomorrow, but just to suck it and see. And if that doesn't work out for them, then we might have a bit of a think about why that didn't work out for them, rather than reading too much personal stuff into it. And for people who have problems with I'll talk more about appetite regulation. I use a lot of tools around teaching people who are at a normal weight. It's much harder to do this for people who are underweight, around some subjective tools for appetite regulation that I've drawn on from people like Nick Korsman and Linda Craighead, and particularly around what one's subjective experience of satiety is. For people who are very concerned about their loss of control of food, we really need to focus on helping them experience satiety and satiation so that they feel safe. That enables people to eat. If they can key into, this is how I know when to stop eating, whether it's external cues or internal cues, that helps them feel a lot safer. I think I might be running out of time now, so I might leave it at that point for people to ask questions if they would like. We're going to be inviting a group of dietitians to expand further on the kind of things that I talked about today, and I would say that my colleagues as dietitians are always been very generous at sharing these ideas, and we do a lot of hitting about with these kind of ideas. So thanks very much.